Surely it's unfair to pass judgment on 2023 when there's still a couple of big releases to come. Well, convenient setup for a perfectly timed piece of mockery. Not when those releases are Aquaman 2 and The Marvels.
Everyone, it's Blue. Make sure you like and subscribe and go follow me on my Twitch and my Kick. Those links are down below. Also, my Patreon, where I react to content on there that I don't post here.
I'm asking what his specific condition is. Down syndrome, cerebral palsy?
Oh, I'm not sure. Sweetie, what is your condition?
How's your año? I'm retired.
Today, I'm going to be reacting to The Critical Drinker, The Death of the Superhero.
On September 3rd, 2023, Blue Beetle finally managed to drag itself past 100 million at the global box office, and it really got me thinking, what's the most efficient way to dispose of a dead body these days? Wait, what? It really got me thinking that there's no more appropriate metaphor for the sad state of the superhero genre than this movie. A bland, generic and creatively inert project sharted out by a studio that's out of ideas and energy, doing nothing that hasn't been done a million times before, and roundly ignored by completely apathetic audiences. And what's funny is that it's the kind of film that would have comfortably raked in $500 million if it had come out 5 years ago when people still actually cared about stuff like this. That time, however, has long since passed, and I think in retrospect, people are going to look back on 2023 as the year the superhero genre officially died. I mean, let's be real here, it's been struggling for a long time now, and people like me have been warning that it was headed towards irrelevancy, but this is the first year when there's really no way of hiding it anymore. Don't believe me? Let's look at the numbers, shall we? Back in 2019, there were 8 cinematic superhero releases, making a grand total of $6.92 billion worldwide. By 2022, we had 7 major theatrical releases, only this time they only managed to bring in $4 billion at the box office. That's a drop of more than 40% in just 3 years. And 2023 is shaping up to be by far the worst year yet. DC have already released 3 movies this year, all of which have flopped disastrously. In fact, none of them have even managed to break 300 million. When you add Black Adam into the mix, that makes 4 flops in a row for DC, and somehow I don't think Aquaman 2 is going to turn things around for them. Neither is James Gunn, the latest entry in a revolving door of producers tasked with salvaging whatever's left of their destroyed brand. Not only does he seem to be burning through fan goodwill with a series of unpopular creative decisions and embarrassing revelations, but he's been put in charge of a studio that might actually run out of money before he can even do anything. Things aren't looking much better for Marvel either. Ant-Man 3 brought in less than 500 million worldwide, nowhere near enough to cover its massive production budget, never mind turn a profit. Secret Invasion, starring Samuel L. Jackson, should have been a big hitter on Disney Plus, but instead turned out to be the lowest rated Marvel show ever made. I mean, at least Guardians 3 turned a profit with $845 million at the global box office, but I don't imagine that the Marvel execs were breaking out the champagne on this one. Not only did it make less than Guardians 2, even without adjusting for inflation or the massive hike in ticket prices, but it also represents a creative dead end for the studio that they can't exploit any further. In fact, the only unqualified success story has been Across the Spider-Verse, which brought in almost 700 million on a budget of just 100 million. That's great and all, but one successful movie isn't going to change the overall picture, and believe me, that picture's a depressing one. So far, superhero movies this year have earned 2.51 billion, a drop of 38% from the previous year and 65% from 2019. And out of the 6 major movies released so far, only 2 of them have actually turned a profit. But Drinker, you ingenious imbiber of intellectual elucidation, I hear you say, surely it's unfair to pass judgment on 2023 when there's still a couple of big releases to come. Well, convenient setup for a perfectly timed piece of mockery. Not when those releases are Aquaman 2 and The Marvels.
What? Oh my goodness. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are being talked about in this video that I'm actually just not very aware of. Did not know a lot of these existed. Never even heard of them. The one that he just mentioned, The Marvels? My, that looks quite stupid. I don't really know what else to say about it. I mean, one wasn't a big enough hint for them to think, this wasn't really liked. Let's just triple the, like, I'm gonna leave it alone. I think another problem is the fact that a lot of these movies that maybe weren't popular at first or maybe didn't do as well, like I think Captain America was one of them. Technically, for what all the other movies were doing, it may have not done very well at first. However, a lot of people kind of stuck with it because it's like, oh, we need to know and invest into this character because he's so involved with Iron Man, he's so involved with all these other characters we care about, and eventually there'll be leading movies that have all of them. You should know about all of the stories. And then we grew to like him, like the maybe second movies were better. Like you just grew to like a lot of them. Like Thor, fine, he was new at first, but you grew to like them. They were good characters. But now every new character or superhero that's introduced doesn't really have support from a really well-known, really well-liked superhero. So if the writing's bad, which it is, there's like not really a lot of success in it or care or investment that people want to make into all of these new random characters that don't even have good writing.
Not when those releases are Aquaman 2 and The Marvels. One is the final pointless movie in a dead cinematic universe, starring what may be the most unpopular actress in Hollywood, for now at least, and the other is so hotly unanticipated that it's now been delayed and reworked 5 different times by Marvel. Even the director seems to recognise that the writing's on the wall when she made this amazingly frank admission to Total Film. I'll pitch Kevin's 17 versions of what can happen with all these women, and why, and how, and this and that, and he's like, okay girl, and sometimes I think I've really got a movie going after this, and then other times I'm like, oh, they have this whole other plan that I'm not a part of. In terms of women-led films and women as superheroes in particular, and excitement around that, I think it's really just about whether or not the movie's good. Especially now we have more and more films that are female-led, that are action-based or superhero-based. Jesus, calm down, Wordsworth, you're really dazzling us with your articulation here. This right here is what happens when reality comes at you so hard and fast that there's just no way to spin it into anything else. She knows that this movie's gonna be a stinker that'll bomb harder than the Manhattan Project and is preemptively trying to manage expectations and deflect blame. Okay. She knows that this film can't just slide its way into a freshly lubed up marketplace like its predecessor did, where anything with the Marvel logo slapped on it was basically a giant money printing machine. The fact is, superhero movies are having to fight harder and harder to garner the kind of attention that would have been guaranteed a few years ago. There's an almost tangible feeling of weariness and resignation when a new movie gets announced now, like an aging man trying to rouse himself for another long shift at the same tedious job he's been working for decades. What used to be an exciting event to be savoured has become a kind of dull chore, something to be gotten through out of obligation rather than genuine desire or interest. And it's funny because everyone seems to have their own pet theory for why this happens. Depending on who you talk to, the problem lies in the oversaturation of the market with far too many projects, or the declining creative quality of the movies and TV shows being put out, or the increasing focus on identity politics and activism at the expense of good storytelling, or the arrogance and hostility of the movie studios as things start to go wrong, or the bland and formulaic nature of the films themselves, or even the dreaded superhero fatigue. For me though, I think the truth is a complex combination of all these different factors. I mean, let's start with the last one first, superhero fatigue. Or, more generally, genre fatigue. As far as I'm concerned, it's very much a real thing, and in the words of King Willie from Predator 2,
"There's no stopping what can't be stopped."
Just like every other fad and fashion that's come and gone over the years, movie genres eventually become stale and played out as times change and people move on to new things. It happened to the adventure epics of the 1950s, the gritty crime dramas of the 70s, the gung-ho action movies of the 80s, and the comedies of the 90s. Why would you assume it wouldn't happen to the superhero movies that have been with us ever since the 2000s? And in genre terms, they've had a pretty good run. And in reality, it probably would have lasted a few more years if it hadn't been for the over-reliance on tired formulas and exhausting CGI spectacle, the oversaturation of the market with endless movies, TV shows, spin-offs and sequels that became almost impossible to keep up with, the hiring of untalented or underqualified writers and directors who are more concerned with pushing their own political worldviews than making good movies, and the increasingly aggressive attempts to attack and gaslight fans who dared to criticise their products and and point out their mistakes.
I also liked another thing that he pointed out, which I didn't even fully notice until he pointed it out. I only noticed it about maybe a little bit of the 90s and the fact that rom-coms aren't really around as much anymore. But I didn't really piece anything together more than that. He put each decade had its own thing going for it. I think he said in the 70s it was like the crime, and then 90s it was like the comedies, and then the 2000s clearly is where the superhero kind of started taking off, and they did clearly have a good run. If they're only just now dying in 2020, you could argue 2021, 2022, he's arguing 2023, that's 20 years, and usually each kind of genre had its own like 10-year run. So technically, yes, again, superheroes had a pretty good run and could even lasted longer if it wasn't so much for this downpour and very hard shift into how those superhero movies are developed and written and how they're coming out and being pushed. Whereas usually they just fall off because we're kind of sick of seeing the same thing in the later of that decade. Like, oh, comedies are great, but if every comedy is kind of coming out with the same sense of humor, you start catching on to, that joke's not funny anymore. 3 movies ago made the same joke. Same with horror movies. Maybe if, you're kind of watching the same type of horror movies, you start knowing where the jump scares are going to be. So things like that just kind of start making people get not necessarily sick of them, but things start becoming predictable. So you do have to actually be more creative in your writing just because everyone's kind of doing it.
The truth is, they got too big, too lazy, too arrogant, too complacent, and it all contributed to an atmosphere of antagonism, frustration, and in the end, apathy. Audiences just don't care for superhero movies anymore. They don't care for the bland and boring characters and storylines being trotted out. They don't care for the tired formulas and played out spectacle, and they especially don't care for the studios making them. I mean, I don't imagine they'll ever vanish altogether. We'll still get the occasional Batman, Superman, or Spider-Man movie because those characters are so timeless and popular that they'll always find an audience of some sort. But the time of the superhero movie as the dominant box office genre is over. And to be honest, I'm fine with that. It's about time Hollywood got shaken out of its money-soaked complacency and forced to come up with new creative ideas. It's about time we had more to look forward to in our summer movie seasons than an endless parade of capes and spandex and ironic self-aware jokes. It's about time we demanded something better in our entertainment. Now, just before I piss off, I wanted to bring one little thing to your attention. Many of you who tune into my open bar streams will be aware of the Critical Doggo, my somewhat faithful companion in the world of media criticism. Well, actually there's 2 of them, but legend has it they've never been seen at the same time and place. Anyway, whatever. The point is that the doggos are retired racing greyhounds that I adopted from a rehoming centre not too far from where I live, and I have to admit, they made for excellent pets. The problem is, these places often operate on razor-thin margins, depending mostly on donations and volunteers just to stay running, and I felt like maybe I could do something to help out just a little. So with that in mind, I'm launching the Critical Doggo plushie, a one-of-a-kind companion for the critical drinker, complete with sunglasses and his own little bottle of whiskey while he chills out on the floor. Probably explains why my doggos are always unconscious. Anyway, I'm going to be donating all of the profits of this campaign to my local Greyhound Rescue Centre, so if you'd like to bag yourself one, then the link is in the description. Or if you're not into the whole plushie thing, but you're interested in helping out a bit anyway, I'll also leave a link to the shelter's donation page. I don't want anyone to feel obligated to help out with this one, so don't feel like you have to pitch in or anything, but I'm hoping that perhaps we can do a little good and maybe help some animals who deserve a second chance at a happy life. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Oh my gosh. I think the favorite part of my video, something that's also fair to say about the entire superhero genre and how long it ran, and why it may have even ran a little bit longer than how other genres have lasted in the past, is because there are so many different angles that you can come at it, and I think that actually, I have an appreciation for that personally. Deadpool had its own type of vibe. It was rated R, the fourth wall being broken, that was huge in its own regard, and it felt kind of different even though it was still a superhero movie just like all the others. It wasn't just like all the others. The Dark Knight trilogy is also a good example, whereas we're surrounded with a lot of Marvel movies that felt a little bit more lighthearted, maybe even some could argue kiddish. I'm not really sure what your phrase or your feeling personally would be about it, but it's definitely noticeable to see that the Dark Knight trilogy was very different. It felt very dark. And so, yes, they all are superhero movies, and some people might have even been sick with them to begin with. But at least that they had some variety. It wasn't every comedy where some were just funnier than others, and maybe some of them had different sense of humors. well, some of the movies that were superhero movies were very dark. They didn't exactly have great endings. And the tone and the overall depressing vibe, eerie. And yeah, I guess that's all that I would add to it. Make sure you go like and follow Critical Drinker, because this is where all the videos are coming from, and support the thing at the end of his video. And if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe my channel and video. And I'll see you all next time.